Alrighty, g'day. Welcome to the CREEDCAST. We're here recording on Friday evening, the 20th of March. It is our squad show. It is round 2 in play already at the moment for a few teams, but we are playing Sunday afternoon, 2:45 against Essendon at Adelaide Oval. It is our home opener for this season, so I'm really, really keen to get down there and take in the festivities of watching what is Josh Carr's first game as the head coach of Port Adelaide at home. So it is a special day in the history of our club, regardless of what has gone on in the previous week. And we'll, of course, preview everything pretty soon here. But as I introduced my co-host, the talent of the podcast, Jamie, we've got some news to talk about first. But first of all, good evening, Jamie. How are you feeling 2 days out, or less than 2 days out, from gracing Adelaide Oval once again to see Josh Carr make his home coaching debut?
Good evening to you and everyone else tuning in. Thanks for joining us. I'm feeling good. The working week for me is over. I know I go to say that sometimes and then forget that our weeks are kind of flipped in that regard. But yeah, my week's over. The footy weekend has started well and truly. So another week of football means another chance to impress, improve, whatever other word that starts with IM you want to pick from. So looking forward to a response.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully it's an immaculate response to go with the theme you just presented me there. We'd love to see a great response. And I'm just really excited. I think it's, as someone who enjoys history and enjoys moments, regardless of what happened last week, as I kind of kicked off the show with, we are witnessing a beloved son of our club who's taken on the coaching reins, coach his first game at home. I think that's a really important moment to note. I think we have such great memories of Carr as a player, whether it be him being the first goal scorer of the grand final back in 2004, him being involved in other moments in 2004, like taking the full brunt of a Jonathan Brown fist. Which shout out to Jonathan Brown, who's looks like he's going to be fine with his health battles, but just announced tonight that he'd had a small tumor on the brain, which I know something we've very personally dealt with recently. So Jonathan Brown, shout out to him. But Josh Carr, who has some one of the most iconic images from that grand final, despite the fact that you had Gavin Wanganeen doing great things and Byron Pickett doing his things, and it's that.
Well, Josh Carr kicked the first goal as well, didn't he? As well,
yeah, and that image is less known than the one of. Yeah, the image that's most known is Jonathan Brown's just angry face and Josh Carr recoiling from a fist is one of the most enduring images of that grand final. So we're talking about someone who's indelible to the history of the modern Port Adelaide Football Club in Josh Carr, and he's taken on the coaching reins, which, as many coaches are pretty at want to tell us at length, this isn't a job that you take on lightly. So Josh Carr has done that. He's taken the reins, and we should be all appreciative and just enjoy the moment of seeing him take the reins for the first time on Sunday afternoon. I think that's kind of how I wanted to start the podcast, is just that appreciation of this moment in history. We've always seen Matthew Primus be a former player. We've seen a few former players, like if you go from the Magpies era to now, but we've actually seen Matthew Primus as a Port Adelaide power player take the reins. But Josh Carr, as a premiership player, and even probably more known to a lot of Matthew Primus is very, very well known, but Josh Carr, with some of those kind of, as I said, the Ramsgate history and all that goes into it too. I think it's really, really important to note that this is a tough job, and he's taken the reins, and even more so, there's an extra amount of pressure when you're a former player of that same club. I think when you look at Damien Hardwick going to Richmond, or Chris Scott going to Geelong, they're going from different clubs. There's a unique pressure, I think, that goes from being a favourite son coaching that same club. Is that just me, or is that something that you feel as well?
No, I think that's fair. And I think someone like Nathan Buckley also felt that pressure as well. And he didn't get the ultimate success. He made it to a grand final, but I think that's fair. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just something I've been ruminating on over the past couple of days. I've just been really kind of looking forward to the opportunity to obviously I'm just itching to get down there and watch the boys in person again, and just appreciating kind of the history that's in play at the moment with Josh Carr taking the reins. So before we get to too much more preview stuff, though, there's been some big news. Obviously, we covered it in the off season when Dougie Cochran's NGA status for Port Adelaide was finally announced that he was eligible for our NGA Academy, and of course is tied to Port Adelaide. Yeah, there was a long journey. We all obviously knew the Zemes Pilot and Louis Salopek were tied. Didn't have to go through the process that Stuart Cochrane and Dougie did with Port Adelaide. Louis Salopek with father son, and Zemes Pilot through the NGA Academy were already tied to the club, but there was this caveat of Tasmania kind of being able to nominate players of interest in the 17 and under kind of age areas, and Louis Salopek and Zemes Pilot were either able to actually allow them to continue their vested interest in them, or they were able to actually opt out and say, no, we are going to we're going to nominate ourselves as our preferred destination being Port Adelaide, should Port Adelaide obviously be able to match the bidding process when it comes to the draft. The fact is, some people I'm still not aware that even though you're father son, you actually have to say, yes, I'm going to take the opportunity to allow the club to nominate me as a father son. Jace Burgoyne actually had to come out and say, yes, I will allow myself to be a father son pick and allow the club to utilize those mechanisms within the draft. So that's what Louis Salopek and Zemes Pilot have done. Zemes Pilot obviously being an NGA Academy pick, and Louis Salopek, of course, we know is Stephen Salopek's son, father-son pick. And Stephen Salopek has said one of his proud achievements of his career is getting to the 100 game mark and allowing his kids to have that choice. So that was big news that dropped this morning, obviously reported by Cal Toomey and on afl.com.au. This is big for two reasons. Obviously, one, we just love having some highly touted prospects tied to our club, and us have the mechanism, obviously, with whatever changes happen, we have the mechanisms to pull them into our list management plans. It is also somewhat tied to, obviously, this is going to be a story all year, the Zach Butters stuff, what we're going to do, what we want to do with draft pick, how we want to build draft capital going forward, having some highly talented prospects tied to our club and us having to have the ability to match those bids. Obviously, probably all goes into a melting pot, a big pot of goulash in how we're trying to figure out our list management over the next couple of years. And obviously, Zach Butters is a big part of that. But it is just, taking that away from it. It's very, very exciting to have these talented prospects. Zemes Pilot, he's look him up on Instagram. He posts a lot of. He's a highly touted basketball. He's a very, very talented basketballer as well. But he's chosen the AFL path, and when you watch him play, it's hard to not get excited by. Obviously, it's just young talent. It's only proven once it gets to the AFL level, and there's a lot of mentality stuff that goes into that. But it's very, very exciting, isn't it, Jamie, to have such highly talented prospects tied to the club?
Totally. It's magnificent, and it's a position where we haven't really been familiar with, and we've worked, I guess you could say we have worked as a club hard to get to this point, because it's one thing to have father-son prospects, and it's one thing to have NGA prospects or anything of the like, but you still have to develop them to get to a point where they are seen as a highly touted draft prospect, and they're ticking those boxes. But then, we have the benefit of being able to choose them. Obviously, a lot is made of these young men when they are still children, I guess you could say. They're not even legal adults yet, and a lot is made of them across the country, that is. And it's once they get into the system that things start to materialize, or it can go any which way. These days, draft prospects, particularly highly touted ones, tend to be a bit more secure. They put a lot of work, in those teenage years, in those late teenage years, they put a lot of work in, like them, their families, their coaches, everyone. And, we have our programs to help assist along the way as well. They're around our club a lot. So it just feels good. Yeah, the club would be dealing with so many different scenarios to try and make it work with Zach, without Zach, with a Nasiah Wanganeen Miller at the end of 2027, for example, all of these different scenarios that they have to account for.
Zach Butters. You know, I've always said he's better than Zach Butters now. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm sure if things fall a certain way, there's a lot of Port Adelaide supporters who have certain opinions that change. But no, to have some prospects, and there's obviously David Roden's son as well, who he has a bit of a decision to make, funnily enough, coming up against Essendon this weekend on that topic, because he's linked to both for two different reasons. I don't know how that works, but yeah, he's linked to Port Adelaide as a father-son, but Essendon as a... Is it an NGA with them somehow? Because he was... Yeah. So...
It must be... is there a zoning thing with NGA? I'm showing my lack of understanding of certain aspects of NGA, but I mean, he's been living... I assume been living over there most of his youth, so...
Yeah.
Something involved in that, but then obviously he's just got the natural father-son tie because of David's amount of games, his tenure at Port Adelaide. So, I think there must be something to do with that. But he's probably, because it has been, and at this point last year, we'd already heard the names Dougie Cochran, Zemes Pilot, Louis Salopek, and Tavita Roden. And these were all the ones that we were like, I hope they get tied to us. And now 3 out of 4, and it's probably a fairly good. And Tavita's the last one. So, and Dougie was probably the one back this time last year that was the most, well, not unlikely. I think we were all hoping it was going to come around some way because it was already being talked about. There was a process in place for Stewie doing the work to see what was, kind of the family heritage stuff that was going to get that done. But I would have thought Dougie was the most unlikely one at this point last year, based on what we knew at that point, and how, because there was a lot of talk about the ifs, buts, and maybes about how that was going to happen. And now we're at the 3 out of 4 stage, and Tavita's the only one that's still. And ultimately, it's his decision to make. If he decides, he's going Essendon, then that's what it is. But I think we've done a fairly good job of tying some very, very good, and obviously Louis a father-son, and Zemes and Dougie through the NGA, and Dougie's NGA and father-son spiritually because of the way that's worked out.
Oh, we had this discussion. We have had this There's a lot of opinions about NGA and the validity of all of it, but in reality, we're talking about someone who's, like you mentioned, a spiritual father-son selection for all intents and purposes. Dougie Cochran, it'll be a father-son. It'll get officially listed as an NGA because that's the process that it's gone through, but we all know what's up.
Yeah, I still have fond memories of when Tommy Cochran kicked his first goal for Port in Gather Round last year, and you're just like from the core of your guts just shouting "Heritage" as he kicked that goal. So there's a lot of heritage with the Cochran family in Port Adelaide. So it's big news, and again, it ties into a lot of the list management headaches for probably list management at the moment based on. But I guess before we get into the preview part and close off this part of the just talking about this, this is just my feeling, and again, I said to you in text earlier today, I'd be fucking stoked to be wrong, based on this is again getting back to the Zach Butters thing. I'd love to actually find out that Zach Butters is committing and that Port Adelaide's list management has still got a plan in place to get these guys in. But I feel like reading the tea leaves and just how things are going, the club probably knows that Zach is likely to want to go home, accept a bid or accept a contract from another club. Zach would be well aware that Port Adelaide and Port Adelaide have actually are on record as of today saying, yes, no, we're going to match any bid if that's the way it goes.
But pay up.
So I feel like all of these machinations are forming that Port Adelaide are like, Zach is, I would imagine that we're going to be this time next year finding out, or earlier than this time next year, but this time next year we're going to know that Zach had actually informed the club, a la Patrick Dangerfield at the Crows, that, they knew a long time before we knew that he was leaving. The club was able to start making their plans. Not like the club's already just like, Zach's going where we're going to match a bid. We're going to get a draft stockpile, and this is what we're doing. There's a mini rebuild going on. That's how I'm feeling. I know that you've been on record on the podcast talking about your your fear and lack of want of seeing Zach in another Guernsey. But how are you
it'll make
feeling
me
now?
sick.
Yes, yeah. How are you? But
Yeah.
are you in a similar way to me now with how things are kind of rolling? That this is kind of the likely scenario.
We're all conditioning ourselves for it to be a reality. It won't change how I feel when I see him running around in a different jumper if that were to materialize. To use that word again.
Arnold.
Yeah. Well, at least we'll get something in return. See, that's the difference.
We still got 10 mil out of Real Madrid because they wanted Trent Alexander-Arnold for the Club World
early.
Cup, so.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I haven't really heard much about TAA's fortunes at Real Madrid, but yeah, conditioning myself will still feel sick, but there would be a silver lining to come out of all that, and is that whoever wants him has to pay up, and then we have the horizon of fresh blood, talented fresh blood as well.
Yeah, that is kind of. I have to say, it is all sliding doors. Like what I would be feeling if we didn't have this, like the little carrots of highly talented prospects, because as someone that involves myself in the. As someone who follows, and you're a Chicago Bulls fan, and I follow my American sports as well. Like, it is a very American sports thing that when your team is bad, the carrot is the draft. Like, the draft is such a huge event in American sports, and like it is a party event, is a 3-day weekend. It is something they invite like fans go to. It is huge, and you can kind of see just that we're tipping that way a little bit, and that and whether the draft itself, the night, is ever that big, but we're kind of like conditioning fans to gravitate towards like, well, if we're bad for a couple of years, all we've got is a draft. And Kangaroos fans who benefited from some of that last weekend against us have dealt with that. I'm feeling a little bit of that right now. Is like I'm conditioning myself to the Zach Butters leaving I'm softening the landing by reading and lathering myself in the Cal Toomey articles about Zemez Pilot and Louis Salopek opting out of the Tasmanian interest for us.
That's it. Yeah. That's it. Focus on the positives.
To grab at.
That's pretty good thing to grab at too. If we're honest, Zemez looks like a machine. Unfortunately, it won't be until 2028 that we'll get to see him actually play AFL football. But he looks just unreal for his age.
Yeah. He looks like he's going to be I don't want to put the pressure on him, but like he's got that kind of like the feel of like a player that's like a unique build, and like just a prototypical, like you could build this guy in a lab and make this is what you want. So excited for it, and we'll certainly keep tabs on that as we go through the journey of the podcast, as we get towards that point and whatever happens in between. Alrighty, we've got a game. Obviously, this is the purpose of the squad show. We've got a game this weekend, of course, 2:45 p.m. Adelaide Oval this weekend. So hope everyone's getting down for it. Get around it, get excited. As I said, historical moment with Josh Carr's first match at home, coaching the Port Adelaide Football Club. A lot of changes for us, actually. I mean, a couple maybe expected, but then obviously you texted me. You're actually the first one to make me aware of the Lockie Jones injury, so we can start there. Lockie Jones injured, so he's out of the side. Objectively, I guess you could say he's replaced by Jackson Mead in the side. Who knows how that machinations will go on the field, but that's how it's written. Jack Lukosius is in as well for Ollie Lord, who has been omitted, and Dante Vicentini has been omitted for Jordan Sweet. The biggest battle of the offseason, and one that I do not think is done yet, but it's certainly Vicentini, unfortunately, while I think he hadn't, again, and we talked about it on the weekend, on the review for last weekend's game, I think he had an okay game in the ruck battle. It just, he still didn't quite do enough to kind of take, I think, to your point from our preview shows for the season, that's how close this battle was, that Vicentini had an okay game. And I think coaches have said as much. I think Hamish Hartlett was on SEN and said, Viss hasn't done a lot wrong, to be honest, but Sweet's just tipped the ledger. So that's how close this battle is. So I think we can start there. Jordan Sweet and ruck gets his chance, and he's got a really good chance to stake a claim to keep that spot for a few weeks at least against inexperienced battery from the Essendon side.
Yeah, Viz can count himself pretty unlucky. I mean, we discussed the stats the other day, but we also did discuss that the eye test was also there, and that I think there's been some genuine discussion throughout the week from outside the Port stratosphere of whether you were setting Viz up to fail in a little bit of a way against all Australian caliber ruckman in Tristan Cherry. It's a line ball call. We're probably going to be having this discussion all year because, as far as we're aware, it is one of the most line ball calls, if not in our club, in the league. Like two people in a specialist position who are both kind of neck and neck. I guess the benefit for me for Sweet is that while he may not offer as much from a centre stoppage scenario, I think he can hold up his own a bit more and probably dominate a bit more at stoppage. So I guess we'll wait and see. I mean, again, I had Sweet in my best 23 as starting as a first ruck. So I think there's a time and a place. We saw it in patches last year where then they rewarded good form, and you can't really admonish people for doing that. And Viz was in good form, so they thought he was better positioned to make a bigger impact than he probably did, while winning the hitouts by a handy margin and hitouts to advantage. Maybe the midfield let him down a little bit too by not finishing off those hitouts to advantage and coughing them up. But at the end of the day, they obviously feel that Sweet is a bit better suited overall. A bit rough, Viz getting dropped after one game. I would have thought that, particularly coming up against Lockie Blackiston for Essendon, it was probably a good opportunity or an easy opportunity for the coaches to go, oh, no, we'll stick with him for another week. Look, it is what it is. I'm not mad with the decision. We'll see what both of them offer in 2 weeks, and in 2 separate weeks that is, and then we'll be the wiser for it come Monday morning or Sunday night, I guess.
Yeah. I wonder, to me, it shows just how line ball that call might have been going into the season, that the Sweet might have been right there, and they gave Vicentini the nod, but they really may have been wanting to see, because it was probably unfair and Sweet to lose his job after a reasonable year last year, and he had a lot of stats that were, nearing the top of the league for ruckman, and I think that just shows how line ball it was, to be honest, for me. And for Sweet, I mean, stoppage is where we were having some struggles last week as well. So if he can kind of help out around that, and just be the Jordan Sweet that we know, because it's the curious thing about the position we find ourselves in, is we look at ourselves dropping a ruckman who. It's unlike a couple of years ago when we were just struggling to find a ruckman, and now we're dropping one who had a reasonable game, but we're like, no, let's try the other guy. It's a very different place to be. It's also, I think Kimbo and the Chad. I keep wanting to say Kimbo and the Rooch, but it is Kimbo and the Chad now. It's just like muscle memory. Said he I think he posed a question. I can't remember if they were talking to Hamish Hartler or who it was, but they kind of posed a question about, is this disruptive to be just going straight from one to the other? But I think to me it just shows how close they are, and also that they highly rate both of them. And maybe that was a plan early on too, was also like, unless Vicentini kicks it out of, has a game out of this stratosphere, that we do have a look at Sweet in week 2 against Essendon and against a reasonably inexperienced ruckman. And your point is correct, though, that if you really wanted to have a good look at Vicentini, then you do give him a shot against Blackiston, who's didn't have a great week against Hawthorn and is very, very inexperienced, maybe similar to Vicentini as far as games played and overall AFL experience, but maybe it was just a plan to kind of give both of them a run in the first month of the season, depending on how they go and see kind of what sticks. It is we have to understand we're in a very, it's not experimental, but we're in a very early phase. Obviously, goes without saying, we're in an early phase of Josh Carr's career, but he's kind of playing around with a few things too. We'll talk about maybe some of the preparation things in a moment, but I think this kind of speaks to just a little bit of the early era of Josh Carr, and that part of that rebuild process is him playing around with his two relatively talented ruckmen.
Yeah, that's it. Just finding what works, finding the mix, and look, I understand the perception of it potentially being disruptive, but Sweet, yeah, like you said, a lot of credits in the bank from last year. His finish to the year was sensational, I thought, in the context of everything. And he already has that relationship with, like, from a match play point of view, with the likes of Zach, Willem, and Connor, Bergman to an extent, although, yeah, his midfield rotations were limited last year for obvious reasons. But Sweet has that relationship. You dare say Ollie Wines will probably come back in round 3 as well. So, and look, just going the early crow, I think Sweet will probably have a good game up against the opponent that he is. I mean, I think Sweet competed well against Meek on both occasions last year, and Meek got the better of Lockie Blackiston.
What was that? Umpires in gather round were a curiosity.
That's right.
To be fair.
Yeah. Meek was quite fortunate in that regard, but I think Sweet beat him overall. But then, as an extension of that, yeah, exactly. Meek got much better of Lockie Blackiston in their hit out against Essendon v Hawthorn in round 1. So, that's what I mean. Sweet will probably have a good game. He'll probably keep his spot, just forecasting him further ahead. And then, the likes of Ollie Wines comes back in, just another person he has a good match play relationship with. So, look, harsh on Viz. He'll have plenty more football to come. There may be another shuffling of the decks, or even both of them in at one stage this season. I dare say, like you alluded to before, Josh Carr and the coaching group may try a few things, dependent on what's going on with the season and our form.
Yeah, it is kind of the blessed that they've actually got there's a plethora of tools almost to choose from, with Lukosius coming back in, as we mentioned. Lord's been omitted, who was kind of the second ruck, so to speak. It is interesting, Lord and Vicentini are omitted, so what the backup ruck situation ends up at is a little bit different to what we saw last week, because Lord was the one that took the second most hit outs for Port Adelaide last week, behind Vicentini, and both of them are out. So that's 37 hit outs that they managed between them out of the side. So that mix will change. Going to the midfield just in general, I think that's probably where the core of the chat tonight remains, is the midfield and kind of what we're going to do at both ends. I mean, Lukosius is an interesting in, but we kind of know the talent he has. It's all about how I think I was chatting to a guy, a family friend at my workplace today, who kind of just talks about, he's a Port fan as well. Actually sits not too far from me at the game, so I'll probably see him on Sunday. And we're kind of just talking, we hadn't caught up for a while, and talking about overall things about recruiting ins and outs of the last couple of years. And we both talked about Lukosius and just said, like, I do not doubt the skills. It's just his application and mindset, which is kind of an overall overarching theme, I think, of this week. Both you brought up with your Jonah Loma and George Gregan kind of analogy the other day. And then it's interesting that has filtered into actually some of the talk out of players and coaches out of last week's game, with Jace Burgoyne's, kind of, I don't know, admission about their mindset going into it, and Josh Carr kind of being quite honest about how he maybe had a misstep in preparation, and kind of all these. You really keyed on it, well, we both did, but you keyed in on just the application and mindset to it, and that's something that we didn't see enough of in the midfield. And I think that this is why it's called the engine room, as a colloquialism in AFL football, is because it is what drives the team. So if your engine room and your midfield is kind of feeling that malaise, for lack of a better word, that's what kind of filters out to what was a performance that was quite average last week. The midfield this week, we want to see a step up in application, but we also want to see, I want to see kind of what we're actually trying to do with some of these players. I did bring up, just out of interest, I didn't think to do it on the review last week, but I thought I'd bring up just CBA's percentages for last week, just to see kind of what we were looking at. And obviously Vicentini's got 83% as a top CBA attendance, equal with Zach Butters, needless to say. Drops down to Willem Drew was at 70% of CBAs, but then you drop down to Connor Rozee had 57% and Miles Bergman had 33%. I want to see that mix adjusted a little bit. Like, if Bergman's not fit enough to go to them, then that's a question. That's a different question. But obviously, horne-francis was only at 27 himself, and we know that. But Bergman, we expected, I know he had some niggles in preseason, but by and large, we're expecting him to play midfield a lot more this year. I said in preseason I'd like to see him at least at 50%. So that's already, a fail mark for my own needs as a nuffy on a podcast. Connor Rozee at 57. Like, I think this is and just as a midfield makeup, like, whether I'm just looking at other teams' toys and wanting what they have because it looks good. You look at our midfield and just the mix. If we're going like outside of obviously Vicentini as the ruckman, that you kind of put them aside because they are at most of the midfield battles. You go Butters 83, Willem Drew is 70, and then Rozee 57 as the top three. There's a little bit of lack of size and bulk, maybe, like Willem Drew, and I think there was a mix. There was I think Josh Carr actually said Willem Drew probably missed a few more tackles than you usually expect him to, because he's obviously a very good tackler. And Butters and Rozee are very good tacklers too. Like, these are all competitive players, and I won't hear a word about people that like to admonish Rozee and certain players for being soft. Like, you and I are very, very on record as defending against that. But there is a certain application that a Miles Bergman size player and we've actually seen him put this into practice against similar big sized midfielders like Patrick Cripps and Jordan Dawson. There is a mix of midfield you can put together that Miles Bergman, just being in the middle a little bit more, can add to. And I want to see a bit more of that this week, because I think when what we talked about with that midfield malaise last week, and then when I saw those CBA numbers, when I had a look at it after, and unfortunately, again, like I just only thought to look at it after we recorded. I was like, we had this discussion. I was like, why didn't I do this? Because we did this a lot last year, and it kind of adds to my feeling that that mix isn't, and we talked about it a lot last year, and it's been a point of discussion this week as well, that midfield mix isn't right, and midfield, and again, shout out to Simon, loyal listener. He put in his notes for the review earlier this week about just this so-called star midfield just not feeling right. And I think that's partly because we're just not getting the mix right. And Josh Carr's in week one. I'm not going to get too crazy about it at all. Even this year, at some point, I'll be like, you start figuring it out. But like, I do want to see Bergman in a few more CBAs if he's fit to. If he's not, if we're doing something that Jason, like the similar Jason Horne-Francis situation, if Bergman is carrying something and we're trying to manage minutes, but I don't know that. I'm not aware of that. And I feel like he is fit and good to go. So give me more Miles Bergman in midfield minutes, please.
Because as far as we knew, Miles was going to spend more time there. And it was just a bit odd to see him, not see him. I guess it's probably a better way to put it.
3 shots and goals. Like, it was just like,
I don't want to say he went missing, because he didn't go missing. And like you said, the stats from a CBA point of view kind of say that he had the 3 shots on goal. It was just a bit odd. It just didn't make sense. Yeah, he looks good.
It wasn't dominating defense like he used to when he was at a proper half back either. Like, it was just like he was just around the place.
Yeah, he was just like chilling,
hanging out.
Yeah. He's just a chill guy.
Mr. Burns coming out of Congress. Yeah.
Yeah. So, look, I agree. I've seen a bit of commentary about the fact that, when the chips are down or another team's got a bit of momentum, instead of just locking it down and extracting a bit of the air out of the opposition sails, Zach and Connor tend to double down at times when they should just kind of lock it down a little bit. And you could watch the game again and there'd be quite a few examples of that. So there's that too, making our midfield not look as sussed. Maybe their application to what they need to do situationally is not quite where it needs to be. The problem is, though, is that, we have been having these similar conversations for 12 months now. And you look at other midfields around the comp and some who don't have the names kind of have just at times tend to have a bit more cohesion. And look, excuse me, even in a down year, we still beat 3 top 8 finals teams, if I can get that out, last year with this group. So
and we should have beaten the Crows in the first showdown. I'll say that.
I agree. I agree with that too. So we all know that they can do it. It's just about putting it together and then showing a level of consistency. And that's where you brought up the CBAs a lot last year. It was kind of a bit haphazard. And I think even Zach had a lot of CBAs and then it dropped off from there, if I remember correctly.
There was that period where it's being tagged and there was little things and we were just trying. I think it was trying. I don't know if whether we were trying to pull the tag off him. I don't know what it was. But we had games where he'd be at 70, 75. It's just no, if Zach's fit, he needs to be minimum 80. Conversely, if just, not that it matters what, because other teams' mixes are going to be different, but you had both, obviously Tristan Cherry was at 87% last week, but Finn O'Sullivan and Luke Davies-Uniacke were both at 87% of CBA. So they just was a core plan to what they were doing, whether that's right or wrong and whether that contributed. But it's just often you'd see teams would have a little bit more of a core plan, whereas it feels again, there's a little bit of haphazardness too. And again, I'm not going to get too much into it because, Horne-Francis is in the side, but he's being managed. So that is someone that I think Josh Carr would love to have at more CBAs, but Bergman, I think, needs to be, if he's fit enough to go, and we're talking about him as the player he is now, we need to have him at more. He needs to be at least matching Connor Rosie there, or at least that needs to be inverse. I still think that the Rosie can be a midfield weapon, but also he needs to be a halfback weapon, and that kind of mix needs to flip. And then or if Bergman's not if Bergman's going to be 30 or 30, 35, he needs to be behind them. But it needs to be an inverse one way or the other of Rosie and Bergman, because I think that, we know Bergman's a very, very good defender too, but I think his future is in the midfield. So, and just, this week, talking about, I know that's a little bit of a review of last week, but we're looking at going into this week. This is a team that won't damage us as much in the ruck if we, again, to the theme of this week though, give them the respect that they deserve. We need to go in
absolutely.
expecting them to play well, but we need to also try to, be us as Nuffies on a podcast can talk about this stuff. I want the team to show a little bit more respect to the opposition. But you and I on a podcast can go, look, the ruck battle should be won by Jordan Sweet. I think we can safely say that. If it's not, then that's a detriment to Jordan Sweet and the coaching group. And the contested possession was a disappointing factor of our game against North Melbourne last week. Essendon had a similar week against Hawthorn. Again, there's a lot of areas that we lost last week against North Melbourne. North Melbourne did look very good. The Essendon already looked Essendon are in a bad spot. Again, I want the team to show them respect, but I on a podcast can talk about it a little bit more objectively and just go, look, Essendon are in a bad spot. This is a midfield battle that's there to be won. It is a ruck battle that's there to be won. And this midfield of ours should be chastened by what they went through last week. Jason Horne-Francis actually used the word embarrassed. And he's not even as much as the media wanted to put Jason Horne-Francis at the forefront of it, he's not at all. He's not.
I know, I was thinking the similar thing. Yeah, he's just a whipping boy.
It was as obvious
he's a poster boy for the club.
Yeah, but Port Adelaide's plan for Jason Horne-Francis was very, very clear for weeks.
It's very clear. Yeah, it's very obvious what we're doing with him. No one's hidden that. And what was I going to say? Yeah, I can't remember, but they do kind of want to put a bit of blame on him. So, um, I don't get that.
But I respect him for actually using the word embarrassed, and whether that's partly part of his personal history there, which I totally understand if he but he, there's a few Port players that have actually put a fair bit of honesty out there, and Josh Carr, of course, as coach, and going into this week, and so when I read between the lines of that, I look at a team that is quite bruised. Egos are bruised after last week. And whether, I don't know how, Zach Butter's ego is also being massaged every week, every fucking waking second by media at the moment, because he's just waking up to see that he's a $2 million man no matter where he is. So how that metabolizes in the playing group, but by and large, the Port Adelaide players that are invested, and not saying Zach Butter's not invested. Again, I am preparing myself for emotional damage at the end of the season. So, but this is a group that needs to respond against Essendon, and again, this is an opportunity to respond against an Essendon side that is making one change. Archie May's been admitted for Isaac Kako, who's going to be a dangerous player to defend against. But by and large, this is the same Essendon side that's been an abject disappointment to Essendon fans for a number of years, and certainly didn't look the part against Hawthorn at all last week. And to be fair, what we talked about earlier this week is that Port Adelaide, for parts of the game last week, actually did look up to scratch. It's just they let there were some mental lapses and whatnot. So I think this is the perfect opportunity for this Port Adelaide midfield, and by and large the Port Adelaide team, because again, I think the Port Adelaide midfield will dictate how well either ends of the field go. Again, engine room and all that stuff, but there's a perfect opportunity here for this midfield to respond and show us that there is some excitement to be had this season.
Yeah, and we mentioned that. Well, I definitely spoke about the fact that all of these players have clearly shown that they're capable of much better games than what they put out at Marvel Stadium on Sunday just past. And still sitting on the midfield, we were having kind of similar conversations that we did leading into North Melbourne and a bit today about Essendon last year when the fixture came up to play them at Marvel. And it was a bit similar. Like, we were just flat. Essendon looked like they had the heart to go all the way. And in the end, they did. They only beat us by 12 points. It was a pretty terrible game. But talking about the midfield, like, we lost contested possession by about 30 that day. We lost stoppage. Excuse me. And that was a game that we actually had Soldo and Sweet. We forget about that for sure, particularly when it was a loss. But it just goes to show that, yeah, we rocked up to Marvel against this team that we're playing now at home this time around, but totally underestimated them. Didn't really execute what we wanted to. But on top of that, they came to play, and while we marginally won the hit-outs, yeah, they won clearance, mostly in stoppage and contested possession. So, yeah, respect the opposition, respect the midfield, because the midfield isn't too different on their end. And I dare say it's not too different on our end, except for Ollie Wines.
Yeah. They do have Braden, of course, like Fiorini's in there as a new recruit, who's one that obviously was of some interest to Port Adelaide fans in the recruitment process last year. Yeah, look, Zach Merritt, obviously, his saga aside, he's a incredible player, and he's going to be. And Darcy Parish, and obviously old favourites like Xavier Dersma for us. They're a talented group. It's just we should, Zach Butters, we know is one of the best players in the competition, and we have a group that needs to step up comparative to the effort last week. I just want to see a response. I think about your words earlier in the week about effort and application. I just know this group can add an extra 5-10% to what they did last week, whether it be sticking tackles or just being a little bit more front of mind about position. There was a little bit of once the game went against them, they were back on their heels a little bit, I think is the best way to put it. They just started to second guess. And I think Josh Carr actually brought that up too. It was just like, he even brought up, like, were they second guessing themselves in the process of a tackle, which is a concerning thing to think about. But again, it's a new era and whatnot. I will
just
caveat
weird
that a lot, but it is, yeah. But there's an opportunity there for this team to respond against a team that is in a similar, unfortunately, in a similar place. I hate saying we're in a similar place to Essendon, but we're two teams that are very, very much being asked questions of and have long periods of possible rebuild ahead. Hopefully Essendon's is a lot longer, but we're two teams that are on the bottom ebbs of kind of, where the media sees us at, where other fans see us at, whether we see ourselves further ahead, further back, who knows? But midfield battle aside, how do you see? I mean, I think our forward line, if we get the right opportunities to the forwards, like we saw Georgiades in what I thought was, I know you had him in your votes last week, and I can understand why. I thought it was somewhat of a I think Georgiades himself would say he was pretty frustrated last week. He obviously kicked his 3 goals. Whitlock kicks his 2. Durden kicks his 2. Durden should have had 3. He had 4 shots. There was opportunities for our forwards despite a frustrating week. I think this is again an opportunity for them to hopefully have an okay week. I think there's some talented players in the Essendon backline, but it's no different to North Melbourne last week. It's going to come down to the supply. But I think Whitlock, I had a lot of promise from last week, and that's probably my key for this week, is I want to see how Whitlock plays his second game, because I think he showed in glimpses last week that he knows how to find leading space out of nothing. This is a game that doesn't, it's not like you're old school. Like the lead, like players that can find leading space has been something that's a little bit we've missed a little bit. And Whitlock being so young and knowing how to do that is really, really promising to me. And I'm really excited to see how he goes this week. More than anyone, obviously Georgiades I love watching, but actually in person for me, Whitlock is the real key to watch, like his continued development and in just his forward craft and in particular, again, finding that leading space, and that opens up the game for Georgiades as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember last year, Georgiades started like a house on fire, and then they kind of shifted. Like Ben Mackay had no answers, and then they shifted Zach Reid onto him, and he actually played a good game against George. And our delivery started to dissipate as that game went on. I remember we kept turning it over at our half forward line almost a lot of the times in the second half in that game. But last year, our forward line looked like, well, at least on the team sheet, Soldo, Georgiades, Powell Pepper, Wines, Richards, Darcy Byrne-Jones, Joe Berry was on the bench, for example, and you would have had, Horne-Francis roll through there, although he was just as a follower. So you get to this year, and we have Georgiades, Whitlock, Richards, Byrne-Jones, Horne-Francis, Berry listed to start, and then we have a Lukosius on the bench who, if you just want to talk about the tools, I think we have a better setup to stretch them this time around. Mm-hmm. Soldo had concrete boots. His overall time at Port Adelaide's been well publicised, and, his output hasn't been where he would definitely want it to be. But I feel that the forward mix is a lot better suited to take Essendon's defence to task. They've still got Zach Reid. Ben Mackay's still there. What he does, who knows? Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Redmond, McGrath. So some proven players, but I feel we're better suited to test them as long as the delivery is where we want it to be.
Yeah. I think your point about the measure of the relative tools, like Soldo obviously not playing last year, like Lukosius wasn't available, and just the mobility of the tools that we have available. Obviously, Lukosius' fitness aside, like I assume he's being picked because he's fit and promised in his Sandville trial last week. Obviously, we know Whitlock's relatively mobile, young, got that youthful energy, and can mark the ball well, whether it be on the chest, on the lead, or test players marking it above his head. Like he's a.
Well, and it's funny.
player.
Sorry to cut in. I think we were talking. I mentioned before in our previous show last week that Jack Whitlock, he has a tendency to kind of spill some as well. And I think we got both. He took some nice marks. We thought he marked one on the line, but then he also got his hands to some, which he didn't quite swallow.
He did.
Yeah, he did. He did mark it on the line and didn't get a shot. So we should have lost by 40 points, not 46 points. The fact of the matter is, and I think the biggest point that you're raising is that he gets his hands to the ball a lot. And for a young player, he's already showing that he can exploit a defender. It's just really nailing in that coffin, putting the nail in the coffin, should I say, and just swallowing as many of those opportunities as he can. Because all of a sudden, we talk about just banking on Mitch having 4 shots on goal a game. And I mean, Jack Whitlock wasn't even that far from it last week against North Melbourne. We could be banking on him having those regular 3-4 shots on goal just due to his size and the way that he gets to the ball, takes it at the highest point, or at least gets there at the highest point too. So it's really promising. And it would be great just to see him kind of tear up a Ben Mackay, who's on big money at Essendon, and about Whitlock just with that youthful exuberance, playing at home. So, I hope the Port crowd gives them a boost as well. I think we'll get a response overall, but just playing at home, different to playing at a Marvel Stadium that's like a sauna last year, that is, against Essendon. Yeah. I have high hopes because, I'm not really sure how tall Archie Roberts is. He's on a halfback flank. So they've got Lukosius and Georgiades, who are hybrids, to deal with the likes of Reid and Mackay. But, is it going to prove too difficult? I definitely hope so.
Absolutely, yeah. I definitely, just hearing you read back kind of the matchups last week, last year against Essendon versus, because thinking back to that game, they really just had to, for Essendon, their big number one worry was just figuring out who to match Georgiades up on, and beyond that, it wasn't too much of a difficulty for them. Lukosius provided, again, fitness. He's mobile and tricky when he's at his best. And certainly just with his range, he provides a threat from anywhere from within 70. So, you've got to be accountable to that. Georgiades can exploit that space that's provided from that. And then Whitlock's essentially dealing with what you said in preseason. Sometimes, depending on how the others who are playing, possibly the third best defender on a tool, and Whitlock, already looks like the type of player that once he gets his kind of ducks in a row, he's going to be demanding a fairly, one of the top 2 tall defenders in any team, just based on how competitive he can be in the air, whether it be leading out with space or marking in the air. He's going to demand a tall defender quality. So, there's chances to exploit here, and we certainly got some promise from that last year when we played them, and we hope to see that again. Finishing off, going to their forward end, I wasn't. We've talked about it. There's been some commentary. There was one of the, and thank you to those that watch on YouTube. There was a comment from someone on YouTube who considered Todd Marshall's game last week to be a bit of a shocker. I wasn't there with Marshall. I thought he had a reasonable game last week, considering it's his first game for premiership points as a defender. And I think we saw some of his intercept play. He was one of the top intercept players on the ground for us, right up there with Sava and Aliir. His disposal efficiency was reasonable. He was doing the job. He's being handed a mandate to be both in his intercept marking defender as well as a defender that can launch the ball forward. So he, in that being his mandate, being its election weekend, I'll start talking about mandates. Marshall. I think Marshall did a reasonable job, and I was reasonably happy with Aliir and Radaglia last week as well. It's certainly not perfect. I think there's some defensive structure things, overall coaching that there's ironing out that's going to be happening across the season. But I think a lot of that came down to there was some, bursts from North Melbourne from some easy ball extraction from the centre that they were able to get forward. And then the game just got away from us in the second half. Isaac Kako, a very, very talented player, obviously. You got 2 meter Peter and Nate Caddy's a real watch for me as far as how we deal with him, because he's kind of got a similar hybrid, X factor style of play. So how we defend him. I mean, who do you put to Nate Caddy first of all? Is the question.
I think Aaliyah had the matchup by and large last year, and I think it makes sense. They're both mobile. Both athletic. Nate Caddy's not your big bustling type. He can shift around and
skill. Yeah.
What was that?
I was saying he's a bit more finesse and skill, and which is modern AFL prototype a little bit, but yeah.
And that's how
Elias had to deal with that plenty in his time as a modern AFL defender.
That's right. I think he's well equipped for it. And I think we've had quite a few discussions about the perception of Lear being just a pure interceptor versus him actually having chops in the defensive part of the game. I mean, that's how it's listed on the team sheet, funnily enough. And I think that's how it's going to play out, because you've got 2 meter Peter. He's obviously a bit bigger, a bit taller, and Asava, again, on the team sheet is listed there. They do have Cole Langford. So, again, they have, 3 tallish forwards to deal with. And that's where Todd Marshall may, be required to apply a bit more defensive accountability. Yeah, I'm with you about Todd. I think for his first game in defence, I think it's probably as good as you could realistically hope for. And I think we also discussed that all the defenders, you could think of a blemish on their game out of that North Melbourne matchup. But by the same token, some of the blame can lie with them, but I don't think the blame can entirely lay with them with some of those blunders or opportunities for North to score.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's North. I feel that we again, talking about mandates. Their mandate last year was sometimes to deal with a lot of undue pressure based on how the ball was coming in, and I think by and large in the first half, the game was quite tight back and forth, and when the game was in some semblance of control, I feel like our defense handled things reasonably well. They were set up structurally quite well. It was just when you got those bursts, and a couple of those goals came from, particularly at the back end of the first half, when it went from 7 points to a 25-point lead within 2.5 minutes. It came from Mitch Georgiades giving up that 50 and Combin scoring from 55 or whatever it was. Then Colby, comes out, it just blasts out of the midfield. Colby Machercha jukes a couple of players, slots one. He does it again, but it then ends up in a bit of a ping pong. And Zane Dersma pops out at the back of a goal square kind of a situation. And it's just none of that I can put on. Again, we want to defend better, but I'm not putting that on the tools, so to speak. That's on a little bit of midfield pressure, and you want to not have easy ball. Both of those goals came out of easy square stoppage or easy center bounce, center ball ups. I'm never going to get used to the verbiage. The game was broken by situations that weren't all, entirely down to the defense for me, and I think what is to the point you're kind of making is, and then second half, just I don't put too much stock into that at that point, because we kind of again they burst out of the center square in the first moments of the second half and kind of put a couple more scores on, and it went from a 1-goal game to an almost 7-goal game in about 5 or 6 minutes of gameplay, and not much of that came down to the defenders. So I can't, they're not perfect and there's room for improvement, but I'm not putting too much stock into that. So I want to see them kind of how they set up, I think, and how they played last week is okay, and go with that for a similar, and hopefully an improvement in overall application will assist them in doing their jobs. Because I think when we were applying ourselves, the best that we did last week against the Kangaroos was when the game was somewhat in control for Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide actually controlled the game for large portions of that second quarter last week. Is something we were dominating in possession and ground and ball possession and ball possession on the ground as to where it was in our own offensive half. As a defensive half, forward 50 entries were in our favour. Like there was a period of play in the second quarter where Port Adelaide were on the ascendancy, apart from on the scoreboard. So, and in those moments, the defense and the structure and everything, how we set up behind the ball looked well. Like even the commentators were like, Port Adelaide looked the more, at one point last week, the commentators said Port Adelaide looked the more damaging side. So, things can change very, very quickly. So when things were in kind of somewhat a semblance of control, our defense looks okay. So it's again, they need to be better in those moments when things go against us, and they can help us out as best they can. But again, some of those moments they weren't really at fault for either. So I need more data to assess where they're at. Obviously, shout out to Aaliyah for getting the year extension, by the way. That's happened since we last recorded. So I'm very happy to see that. I think he's still got a lot left in the tank, obviously. So, but yeah, as far as, Aaliyah, we know he's an Australian defender and stuff like that. Asava, I think he's playing okay, and I'd like to see him get some legwork into the season to build up to where he was last year potentially. And obviously Harry Ram's out for a little while, so we don't even have to have that discussion at the moment. Asava's in. Asava's good. We like Asava. Asava it is. And then Todd Marshall, I think, and thankfully after last week, I thought Todd Marshall was going to be out for 4 to 6 again.
Yeah.
But he's in.
What a good turnaround.
Yeah, so I'm really, really glad to see that group get another shot at it, because like I've just spent far too long rambling about, I think they at their best last week looked okay. So I'm intrigued to see them go again this week against what is not the best forward group that they'll come up against, but one that's got enough damaging and dangerous players for them to contend with alongside their obvious counterparts in not Lockie Jones, Jackson Mead or whoever it'll be back there with them, Jace Burgoyne, Miles Bergman, Connor Rosie, whoever's going to be back there as the.
Well, that's it, and because it's not only the tools. Like once he hits the deck, you've got the likes of Kako. They've actually listed Archie Perkins and Sam Durham as part of their forward mix. They'll obviously rotate through the midfield, but some handy players at the feet of their tools. So I'd like a good,
very nice last week, by the way. It was a good old South Australian boy. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be good to have a look at him just as a footy fan. But Jace Burgoyne, Kane Farrell, I really want a lift from out of last week's game. They're going to have their work cut out for them. It's going to be a very big game for Jackson Mead. No matter how much game time he plays, he's been picked to the chagrin of a lot of Port Adelaide supporters. Coming off of a preseason where he looks in tip-top shape physically, and look, I think someone put up a graphic. I think it might have been from the West Coast game. Again. Yeah, very Hamish Hartlett-esque from back in the day. Even I think Hamish Hartlett might be rocking a similar hairstyle now, but I think someone put up a graphic about Mead, and I think he laid 7 tackles or something against West Coast. So in that preseason hit out. So again, just someone who's familiar with our group. They obviously have a bit of faith in him, while a lot of people on our side of the fence don't. But the jury's out, because he's in a new position as well. So we all want to see how he does. Obviously, hope he does well, but it's a very big game for him.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Huge game for Mead, because there was 18 months ago, people were reasonably happy with where he was at as a Port Adelaide player, and last year, obviously, that kind of storyline turned, and now he's more or less playing for his career this year. I think we enjoy the Jackson Mead story, and I have nothing against Jackson Mead, but yeah, he's absolutely playing for, because particularly the skill set he has and the position he plays. It's it's a position that's stacked with, you can lose your spot pretty quickly and fall down the pecking order pretty quickly. So big chance for Jackson Mead, and obviously as Port Adelaide fans wanting a win and hoping for a good win. Jackson Mead, and I think the home opener last year against Richmond was his best game, I think, in his career. Was it? Didn't he start 30 disposals in that game, I think? So, yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Look, for us as Port Adelaide fans, that would be a great story for us. If he can have a similar game, then that would probably mean that there's a comfortable Port Adelaide win on the table again. If you have any other closing thoughts, I figure we're getting late on long in the tooth on this evening, Friday the 20th, so we should start closing out. But if you have any closing thoughts, feel free to put them up. But also, what's your prediction? Whether it be your heart, your head, or a mixture of both, where are you feeling for a win, loss? I'm assuming win, but I'll let you take it away.
I don't want to lead the witness, but yeah, no, I'm expecting a response. We have to expect a response. There's too many good players in our setup and too many players who had an average at best game who we know can play better. We got to respect the opposition and all of that. Essendon might be down in the doldrums themselves, but we're at home. Member recognition round. Like you said, Josh Carr's first game at home too. We've got a bit to play for, and a lot of these guys would want to put up a lot better showing for 4 quarters. So, look, I'm not expecting a monumental victory, much like last week. I think a goal a quarter better is what we can aim for, and is very realistic. And look, while I'd love a 10-goal win, I think a 4-goal win, as long as we play well, we play solid, is the minimum we can probably ask for.
Yeah. I'm going to just be bold again. I think it's still, whether it's the ghosts of preseason recency. Like, I just think that this team has shown they can play very, very good football, and where Essendon fall in that mix, I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, look, I'm not going to say it's going to be a big win. I'd like to say that we're at least a goal and a half better. So, like a 6-goal win, I think would be fair. I'd like to see better, but, I am somewhat reticent to get too confident based on some of the lapses in concentration or whatever you call it from last week. But again, there was, despite what the end result looked like last week, I think there were signs as to why we can look like a better side than we did at times last week as well. So I'd like to see a 6-goal win. That would be nice. I think that would kind of settle the nerves a little bit. Yeah. And anything more than that, I think, would be a good bonus. And if we can blow them out of the water, then that would be a hell of a response. But as long as we get a win, this week, will stave off a little bit of that. Some of the undue credit, like there's a bit of that, like already, like, oh, what's Josh Carr got going here? It's just like, we've got to be conscious of the fact this is very, very early on in an era, and give him a shot. We've seen Matthew Nicks at the Crows take 3 or 4 years to even get them to a point of competitiveness. By the way, they lost by a goal tonight after kicking 5 goals in a row to take the lead. So
I was going to mention that earlier. But everyone would already know by the time they're consuming this. It's just good to make mention.
Yes, we were keeping an eye on that game as we were recording, and I did, had it on in the background and saw them come back from 4 goals down to take the lead, and Crows fans were very, very happy, and so it just gave me a little bit of joy that they then got to get the heartbreak after that. So. But no, they're a very good team that came from, objectively, they're a very good team that came from a fair few years of Matthew Nicks battling what is he doing with this team stuff. So Josh Carr needs to be given a shot to get things going the way he wants, and it certainly isn't going to happen after 2 weeks of football. So we've got to keep kind of that in mind, whilst also being, we can be critical and look at things as they happen as well. So, a win this week would be a nice little just response, and already a feather in the cap for his early coaching career to kind of turn something around from what has been a rough first week for him, both on the field as well as he's had to deal with the media fallout. He's getting the full spectrum of first week coaching as a disappointing result, and then having to kind of deal with the mental fallout of what that means as a footballing coach. So
yeah, and sorry, just on that, I think he's sorry, I think he's handled himself as well as he possibly could have. He's been cool, calm, and collected the whole way through, taken a bit of the responsibility himself, and just dealt with whatever's come his and our way, which has been a plus for mine.
Yeah, I think that's all I can ask for out of a coach or a representative of my club, whether it be a coach or a player or a executive, whatever it may be. You just a little bit of honesty and Josh Carr has never been anything but that. And his kind of response to it and kind of taking some responsibility for how he prepared the side. That's maybe he had a bit of overconfidence going into the week, but then I don't mind that if he went in with confident last week, but then he's learned a harsh lesson the first week about how he reads an opposition team as well, and that's going to bode well for his coaching future as long as all the other bona fides of his coaching kind of acumen are there. He's learned a lesson in how to prepare a side for in this kind of situation, which is a unique situation coming up against a side that Kangaroos were a side that were shit for 6-7 years straight. So you can be forgiven for going into your first game and hoping So I'm excited for the Josh Carr era still, and obviously, and we do not as you said, throw the baby out there with the bathwater. So a response this week against Essendon, whatever that may be, as long as it's a response, will be welcomed by me, and I'll keep looking forward to the future, whether it be as we started off the podcast, with whether the true future starts only when we've got Zemis Pilot and Louis Salopek and co running around, who knows? But the future is ahead, and it will be bright once again at some point. It may not be in the next few weeks, but certainly, hopefully, this week we see a little spark of that against Essendon, whether it be a 4-goal win, a 6-goal win, or a 1-point win, whatever it may be. Let's get a win, get Josh Carr's first coaching win under his belt, and move on from there. I think any closing thoughts on this weekend's game? We're just looking forward to getting down Adelaide Oval and having a beer, a few small beers.
Yeah, no, definitely. No closing thoughts for mine apart from, anyone listening or watching, if you can get down there, get down there. But for everyone else, I hope we're all cheering on a Port Adelaide victory come the end of it.
Absolutely, yeah. And feel free if you're down there and you want to reach out and socials, whatever, and say, hey, I want to have a beer, then let us know. We'll be floating around, so if we can, we will. Happy to, and look forward to catching up with some of the CREEDCAST faithful across the season. Certainly know there's a few of in a circle, so to speak, that we've already kind of talked about catching up and gather around and whatnot. Shout out, Stu. And look forward to meeting a few others across the journey of the year. And always reach out if you're at a game, and if we're around and able to, we'll absolutely catch up for a beer or a soft drink. If you're not a beer drinker or a wine drinker, if you want to just have a can of Coke, we'd be happy to. I was trying to do a Scouse accent, but I pulled out of it midway because I can't actually do it. Yeah, can of Coke and the chicken. Carr and the pair. Let's get the W this weekend.
Thanks, guys.